Hello and welcome to Alien Encounters of the Strange Kind. When people talk about alien encounters, normally the ones spotted fall into a few common descriptions. Sometimes they look reptilian, sometimes they look like giant praying mantis, but as a rule of thumb, the ones known as greys are typically the most common. In fact, the mere mention of the word alien more than likely brings an image to your mind of this. However, there are a few sightings that don't fit this mold, and it is interesting that in a lot of those cases, they seem to take on the characteristic of having robotic qualities. Warning: before starting our list, I do want to make something really clear. I never include stories involving hoaxes unless I am debunking something. As such, a few of the following sightings are a bit questionable. Yet, as far as I could gather, they haven't been confirmed to be a hoax. With that said, I may briefly add my point of view, but my intent is not to prove or disprove the following cases. I am providing the encounters as they were reported. Pascagoula, Elephant Man. Our story begins on October 11th, 1973, in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Two co-workers named Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were fishing from a pier located on the Pascagoula River. For the most part, the trip was uneventful up until that point, and it seemed to just be a normal, quiet trip. As the sun began to set at around 6 o'clock, the men suddenly heard a weird hissing sound near their location. As they looked up, they saw a massive bright light, and from it emerged an oval-shaped craft that was 30 to 40 feet long. The craft didn't have the typical lights that most people encounter, but it did have two that were flashing a bluish color. After landing, the craft opened a doorway, and three creatures emerged that were very strange looking. The two men were terrified, but Mr. Hickson stated that when one of the beings placed its hand on them, a feeling of being calm swept over their body. This calm quickly changed to the men being paralyzed, but still somewhat conscious. Charlie believed that when the hand was placed on them, it injected the men with some type of chemical. They were described as being around 5 feet tall, and their pale skin was wrinkly, almost akin to what an elephant looks like. Their faces didn't appear to include eyes, and they had small slits for a mouth, and three long carrot-like projections from the head where a nose and ears should be. Their arms were extremely long, and the hands resembled a glove or lobster pincers. It was said that these beings appeared to only have one leg, and the foot resembled that of an elephant. It was later discussed that they could have had two legs, but when together, they appeared as one. One notable thing is, even though these creatures were strange looking, one of them seemed to be feminine. Once aboard the ship, the two men were examined, and the only words spoken were that the beings stated that they were peaceful. Charles reported that the beings seemed very robotic with how they moved. After the examination was done, the two men were returned to the spot where they were taken, and Mr. Hickson stated that they were informed that they would be visited again. As of such, Charlie claims he was abducted at least one other time a year later. Now, through the years, many have claimed this story was a hoax, due to discrepancies in the story, and the fact that Charlie refused to take another polygraph test after he passed the first one. However, up until Charlie's death on September 9th, 2011, he never admitted it was. In fact, in 1993, he even started his own UFO investigation team in order to find answers. As for the other man involved, Calvin Parker, he did write a book about his story, but for the most part has tried to stay hidden. His absence in this case is odd, but some people do choose to avoid media exposure after an encounter, whereas others bask in it. Although in 2018, he finally stepped out of the shadows and allowed himself to be interviewed. His side of the story matched Charlie's, other than he claimed the alien beings floated and didn't have legs. Years after this sighting, at least 4 other people have stepped forward, claiming that they either saw the same craft that Hickson and Parker described on that night, or that they even saw the same creatures near the water. In one report, a woman even stated that on that night, the radio in her car started to act funny, and at one point her vehicle inexplicably lost power. While you may assume that these later reports were just from people trying to get their 5 minutes of fame, this doesn't seem to be the case here. Quite a few of them publicly stated that they didn't want to come forward earlier since they saw how Hickson and Parker were treated by both media and the townsfolk, as a bunch of lunatics or hoaxers. So was it a hoax? We may never know. Alabama Metal Man. This next story was suggested by a viewer named Lars Bothoff, so thank you for this. On October 17, 1973, a 29-year-old man named Jeff Greenhaw from Falkville, Alabama, had a really odd encounter. Jeff was the chief of police at the time, and on that night he was sitting at home just enjoying his off-duty hours. At 10 o'clock he received a call from an unidentified woman who was obviously very distraught and claimed that she just witnessed a UFO landing in a field outside of town. Jeff called in the event to his office and then jumped into his truck. He was armed with his pistol, handcuffs, and a camera, in case he did encounter a UFO. Once he arrived at the location where the craft was said to be, he searched the area, but didn't find anything. Jeff drove around the perimeter of the field, but still didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Finally, he decided to drive down a less traveled gravel road. After driving down the road for a while, he suddenly noticed a strange humanoid being standing about 75 feet off of the road. At first, he thought it was someone who was in need of help, so he left his vehicle and approached the being. The whole time, Mr. Greenhaw called out to this person, but it didn't respond. As he drew near, he was standing less than 15 feet from this person when he realized this wasn't a human. The being was not very tall, but it was covered in a shiny material that was like glass. The creature had an antenna coming from the top of its head, didn't appear to have a neck, and was moving in a strange, robotic fashion. After receiving zero response from this being, Jeff grabbed his camera and started to take pictures of it. It was at this point that the being reacted to the flash of the camera, quickly turned, and started to run away in the field. Jeff jumped into his truck and started to follow the being, but even though he was traveling at 35 miles an hour, it was able to easily outrun him. Mr. Greenhaw claimed that this being traveled almost 10 feet with each stride it took. At one point, Jeff lost control of his vehicle on the gravel road and slid into a ditch. The last he saw the creature was of it disappearing into the shadows of a tree line. Afterwards, he filed his report of the encounter, and this is where things took a turn for the worse. He was rather quickly removed from the city council and was fired from his job. Not long after this, relations between him and his wife began to sour, and the two divorced. Then, to top it all off, his house was burned down as well. With all this, Jeff still refused to admit that what he had reported was a hoax. To this day, Jeff admits that he wished he never saw the creature, but even though it caused him nothing but trouble, he is steadfast in his report being accurate. Some have claimed that Jeff was the victim of a hoax, but it doesn't explain how a person could outrun a car. Even today, Olympic runners find it difficult to reach 30 miles an hour, and that would be without wearing a tinfoil suit or the asbestos firefighting gear that many people claim this image shows. So at first, I immediately assume, like everyone else, that the picture shows a person in tinfoil. But after adding in the rest of the story, it doesn't seem to fit. Now, of course, Jeff could have made up the details, but after risking everything in his life, you would have thought that he would have come clean by now. He may feel that he has nothing more to lose at this point, but I don't know. What I do know is that apparently there is more detail to this story that has been kept out of the public eye. The Sandown Clown. We have a really odd story that I'm not sure if it fits with alien encounters, but a weird detail seems to fit. On May of 1973, a family were vacationing with their two small children on Lake Common in Sandown in the UK. During this trip, the children, whom the girl is the only one named as Faye, and her brother, heard a strange siren sound emanating from the nearby forest. Curiosity took hold of the two, and they wandered off to try to find the source of the sound. Once they neared the tree line, they spotted a really odd-looking creature standing there holding a book, and as they watched it, it dropped it into the stream. The being then recovered the book and ran into its hut, where it returned holding a type of microphone. The children claimed that the being was acting really shy, but it held up a paper which said, "Hello, and I'm all colors, Sam." Due to its friendly nature, they felt comfortable enough to step close to it. Not to mention that apparently they weren't familiar with stranger danger. The creature was described as standing around 6.5 feet tall. Its head was perfectly round like a basketball, but its face was completely flat. Its hands and feet only had 3 digits on each limb, and its skin was bright white, but with a texture of paper. As you probably can guess from the title, the description only gets weirder from here. It wore blue gloves, and its clothes were torn but colored red and green and resembled that of a clown. It wore a yellow hat-like object on its head, which was pointed like a cone, and out of it were 2 what were described as wooden antennae. The same kind of antennae were said to also be present coming down the cuffs around the wrists and ankles. The hair that was seen on its head was reddish-brown and sparse. At one point the being did take off its hat, and the children saw that it was fairly bald outside of those few strands, and it had extremely large white ears. The children stated that the face appeared to be painted on, and these features are even more strange. The eyes were 2 blue triangles, the nose was a brown rectangle, and the mouth consisted of a small yellow oval shape. During the encounter, none of these shapes moved or blinked. The whole time its mannerisms were considered to be fairly robotic. The creature did talk to the children using a portable microphone system at first, and then switched to simply writing down its answers on a piece of paper. After a while, the being invited the children into its hut, and it was described as being in the woods near the lake. It was 2 stories tall, the walls were covered in a red and green tile patterned paper, and the floor was completely made of metal. From all accounts, the only furniture in the residence was a wooden table and chairs. During their stay, the creature told them that he was afraid of humans, and was not capable of defending itself if it was attacked. It also said that it survived by drinking water from the lake after it had cleaned it properly, and that it ate berries it found. A really odd addition here was at one point the being placed a berry in its ear and moved its head to the side. The children saw the berry roll inside its head behind where the eyes were, and eventually landed in its mouth. The children said they asked it a few questions, such as what was its name, to which it replied it didn't have a name, but there were others like it. When they asked why it was dressed in tattered clown clothes, it said it was the only thing it had to wear. They asked if it was human, and it chuckled and said no. When they asked if it was a ghost, it replied, "Well, not really, but I am in an odd sort of way." All other answers were responded to with a simple, "you know," answer. The children then left after half an hour and returned to their parents. They, of course, told of their story, but the parents believed it was merely a figment of their imagination. Later they returned to prove their encounter and found that the being and his house had vanished without a trace. Even as the children got older, they insisted that the story was real, and even the British UFO Research Association, or BFORA, investigated the claim and couldn't debunk it. I have to wonder if the hut the children saw, being it was made of metal, was in actuality a spaceship. Obviously this could have been a prank, as some claim, but the way it acted, how it ate the berry, and due to it only having 3 digits, makes me question this. Obviously my mind, being a parent myself, immediately goes to some human person trying to lure children into danger dressing like a clown. Even as such, it had ample opportunity to do so, and as the story stands, it didn't try anything. The only thing this could be, if we factor in all of the story, is that it was just an elaborate tale from some overactive imaginations, or that it was, in fact, a being from some location other than Earth. Maybe interdimensional? Who knows? Medford Schmoo. I was going to end the video there, but a lot of you keep asking for longer videos, so I decided to include a short one. This topic was suggested by a viewer named Jackalope. so thank you. There really isn't a lot to this story, but I'll tell you what is known. In the summer of 1953, a family consisting of a mother, father, and 12-year-old daughter saw something really odd in the city of Medford, Oregon. One night, the family saw 3 strange creatures moving about in the forest near their house. They were described as standing around 4 feet tall, had the body shape of a peanut, and were covered in white woolly hair. There didn't appear to be any facial features, nor any arms or legs. As of such, they were said to be able to effortlessly glide over the forest floor. Many liken them to the famously known Fresno nightcrawlers, but those beings have distinct legs. Maybe they have adapted since 1953? While not a lot of information is known about this sighting, many point out its similarity to the old Lil Abner cartoons character called the Schmoo. Although those creatures were hairless, had legs, and an obvious mouth and eyes. If we are going that route, then I think they resemble the Herculoids from Space Ghost. However, that didn't come out until the 1960s. I will say that I find it questionable that this story didn't emerge until the 1984 April to May edition of the Center for UFO newsletter. Not to mention that so much of the details is very vague, other than the location. Even as such, it hasn't been proven a hoax, and it's a fun one. As I end this video, I was curious what your thoughts are on these encounters. I'm sure many of you probably feel a few of these were hoaxes. In my gut, I feel the same way, but with keeping an open mind, I can't say that they are until I have proof it is. Shockingly, I planned on this video being fairly short, but as I got to this point, I realized I have way more than enough material for a second part. So, be on the lookout for that. Also, I wanted to announce that due to many of you voting for the next state in our Cryptid by State series, Alaska has drastically jumped up the list and will certainly be next. I know the first of the month is a ways off, but I do need to decide on my next state early so I can gather information in advance. So keep in mind that you can still vote for the state after that, and I have seen many states go from the bottom of my list to being in the top 3, just with your votes on last week's video's comments. As it stands, there are still 12 states that currently have 0, if not only 1 vote for them. So, let their voices be heard. Just so it's said, I won't release how many votes each state has, outside of maybe the top 3, since I want this process to be organic. So keep voting, and I'll keep counting. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Also, it would be greatly appreciated if you share my videos with someone you know who may enjoy this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.